You already know Thor, big red beard, giant hammer, muscles on top of muscles. He's the guy who smashes mountains and drinks entire oceans dry. And thanks to a certain movie studio, most people think Thor was basically the strongest god in Viking mythology. But here's the thing, he wasn't. Not even close. The Vikings, the actual people who prayed to these gods over 1,000 years ago, knew something we've completely forgotten. There were forces in their world that made Thor look like a nervous little kid. Beings so powerful that Thor himself would lose to them. Sometimes in an arm wrestle, sometimes in a drinking contest, and sometimes in a fight he never even saw coming. So who was actually stronger than the god of thunder? And why did the Vikings, a people obsessed with strength, build their entire universe around the idea that raw muscle isn't enough? Let's dig in. First, let's get one thing straight. When we say strongest, we're not just talking about who can lift the heaviest rock. The Vikings didn't think that way. To them, power came in layers. There was physical strength, sure, but there was also magic, wisdom, fate, and control over life and death itself. And by those rules, Thor was strong, but he was really just the muscle. He was the bouncer at the door, not the owner of the building. Think of it like this. Thor protected the gods. He fought their enemies. He was the shield. But a shield doesn't run the kingdom. The people giving the orders, the ones pulling the strings, they were something else entirely. So let's meet them, one by one, and watch Thor drop down the list. Start with Thor's own dad, Odin. Now, Odin didn't win fights with his fists. In fact, he'd probably lose an arm wrestle to his own son. But Odin understood something Thor never did. Knowledge is a weapon. The Vikings said Odin gave up one of his eyes, just gave it away, to drink from a magic well that granted wisdom. One eye for the ability to understand the universe. And he thought it was a bargain, but he didn't stop there. Odin hung himself from a giant tree for 9 days and 9 nights, stabbed with his own spear. No food, no water, just dangling in agony. Why? To learn the secrets of the runes, the magical writing that could heal wounds, break chains, calm storms, and even raise the dead. Think about that. Thor could smash a giant, but Odin could rewrite reality with a few carved symbols. He could win a war before it even started, just by knowing how it ends. Muscle versus mind. And in the Viking world, the mind won. Odin was the king of the gods for a reason, and it wasn't his biceps. Okay, but Odin's family, that's kind of a technicality. Surely Thor could beat everyone else, right? Nope. Let me tell you about the time Thor got completely embarrassed. And I mean humiliated. There's a famous story where Thor travels to the land of the giants, to a place ruled by a giant king named Utgarda-Loki. And this king challenges Thor and his friends to a series of contests. Simple stuff. Should be easy for the god of thunder. First, Thor tries to drink from a drinking horn. Just a horn. He gulps and gulps and gulps, and the liquid barely goes down. He fails. Then they tell him, fine, just lift our cat off the ground. A house cat. Thor pushes with everything he's got, and he can only lift one paw. One paw. Then an old woman challenges him to a wrestling match. An old lady. And she brings Thor down to one knee. Thor leaves feeling like a total failure. But then the giant king tells him the truth. That drinking horn? The other end was connected to the ocean. Thor had actually lowered sea levels across the whole world. That cat? It was secretly a giant serpent that wraps around the entire planet, and Thor nearly lifted it out of the sea. And that old woman? She was old age itself, and nobody, not even a god, can ever beat old age. So the whole thing was an illusion. The giants were so powerful they could bend Thor's senses and make him doubt his own strength. That's a level of power Thor simply didn't have. And speaking of that world serpent, let's talk about Jormungandr. This creature is so massive, it wraps all the way around the entire world and bites its own tail. And here's the dark part. The Vikings didn't believe Thor would win against it. They believed the exact opposite. In the prophecy of Ragnarok, the end of the world, Thor finally faces the serpent in one last epic battle. And he wins! He kills it! But then he takes 9 steps and he drops dead, poisoned by the sink-in. The Vikings, who loved Thor, who wore little hammers around their necks for protection, they still wrote a story where their strongest fighter dies. His raw power wasn't enough to save him or the world. Because in the Viking mind, no amount of muscle can beat fate. And that brings us to the true strongest power in all of Norse mythology. It's not a god with a hammer. It's not even Odin with all his wisdom. It's fate. The Vikings had these 3 beings called the Norns. Picture 3 mysterious women sitting at the base of that giant world tree, weaving the threads of destiny. And here's what's wild. Even the gods were bound by their weaving. Odin couldn't escape it. Thor couldn't escape it. Deep down, that they were all going to die at Ragnarok, and they knew it in advance, and they couldn't change it. Think about how heavy that is. These aren't gods who feel safe and immortal. These are gods living with a death sentence, doing their best anyway. So when you ask, why wasn't Thor the strongest? The real answer is this. In the Viking universe, nobody was the strongest. Not really, because everyone, gods included, bowed to fate. Now, here's the part that most people miss. And honestly, it's the most interesting bit. Why would a warrior culture, a people who lived and died by strength, build a mythology where their strongest hero loses? Where even the king of the gods is doomed? For decades, people assumed it was just gloomy storytelling. Cold weather, hard lives, dark myths. Simple. But it's actually way deeper than that. The Vikings weren't glorifying muscle. They were teaching a lesson. To them, the point of life wasn't to win, because you can't win against death. Everybody dies, even the gods. The point was how you faced it. Do you run and cry? Or do you stand tall, grab your sword, and charge in with a smile, even knowing you'll lose? That's why their heroes go into battles they can't win. That's why Thor still swings his hammer at a monster he knows will kill him. Courage in the face of certain doom. That was the highest honor a Viking could imagine. So the weakness in the myth was actually the whole point. Thor being beatable made him relatable. It made him brave. A god who can't lose isn't brave. He's just safe. And you know what? We still carry this idea today. We just don't notice it. Think about your favorite movie heroes. The ones who really stick with you aren't the ones who win easily. They're the ones who get knocked down, who bleed, who lose people, and who get up anyway. We root for the underdog. We love the last stand. We tell our kids that losing with courage beats winning by luck. When someone's fighting a disease they probably won't beat, we call them brave. Not because they'll win, but because they refuse to quit. When a team is down by 30 points and still plays their hearts out, we cheer louder, not quieter. That's pure Viking thinking. It's been sitting inside us for over 1,000 years. The Vikings figured out something we still feel deep in our bones. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you stand up. So, was Thor the strongest Viking god? No. His own dad outsmarted him. Giants humiliated him. A serpent killed him. And fate had already written his ending before he even threw his first punch. But maybe that's exactly why the Vikings loved him. Because Thor wasn't strong in the way we think. He was strong in the way that actually matters. He kept swinging, right to the very end. That's the real story hiding behind the muscles and the hammer. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. Next time, we're going even deeper. We'll explore the twisted story of Loki, the trickster who broke the gods from the inside. And trust me, that one's a wild ride. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this, do me a quick favor and subscribe. It genuinely helps fund the next video. Thanks for watching.